On today's podcast, The Signals, we have Anzar Khaliq from San Francisco Bay University. Anzar, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. It's an honor to be here myself.
And I think you're joining us from San Francisco Bay University, where you're the Chief Learning Officer. Tell me a little bit about San Francisco Bay University.
San Francisco Bay University is it's an interesting university. We call it a challenger brand in higher education. One of the terms our provost uses, it's like the Waymo of the industry, or like the Airbnb. It does not try to be the big names, but it tries to provide services to a part of the community that really needs those services, but is not being served by the existing models. So it's a small university with a small student population. When I say small, the maximum size would be around 1,800 to 2,000 students. This new brand, San Francisco Bay University, is 2 years old. It is coming from a previous university, which was a traditional polytechnic university. And that university changed and rebranded itself into San Francisco Bay University. That started, as I mentioned, a couple of years ago. And it looks at higher education very differently. Every single norm that you know of that runs higher education industry is questioned and challenged. To put it simply, if one was to rethink higher ed, like all questions were open. Why do we have 4 years? Why do we have credit hours? Why do we teach the way we do? Why is academic administration working this way? Why is academia this slow? And if everything was to be created ground up, what could it look like? That's what SFBU is.
Oh, wow. I have so many questions. Okay, so the first is, you mentioned your unique community, people who have been unserved previously by higher ed. Tell me a little bit about the learners that you're serving and where they're coming from.
So SFBU has traditionally been serving a lot of international students, but the newer brand is also very specifically helping students within California to have access to education. And not just in California, in fact, within the United States, many options are opening for domestic students. But to give it some context, California, there are certain school standards, A through G, that if you go through them, then you get eligible for education in the state universities. More than 50% students do not pass them. And by default, their ability to continue in higher ed is lowered dramatically. And many of those are not succeeding, not because of their own fault. In many cases, it's beyond their control what's happening in their lives or the experiences that they're being given. And so by default, there is a very large part of our community that is in many ways not allowed to continue. And this has very long-term consequences on not just the economy, but the culture and lives of everyone around. And so there's clearly higher education is not prepared enough to believe that we can create these journeys for students when they come in by ensuring that each one of them gets a very specific personal experience. Personalized education is not the forte of higher ed. What we try to do is, here is a very generic, large experience. Everyone should go in. Unfortunately, many of you will filter out in the way, but you just figure it out. It assumes a lot of things, that students would have access to X, Y, and Z in order to succeed. And in many cases, students do not have access to that. And I'm not just talking about material resources, many other things. And so the students that we are now serving these are typical students from in any university, but there's a large number of students who think that for many reasons they would struggle to succeed in a traditional university, or they need a lot of support that allows them to succeed, or many of them are just interested in finding an opportunity in the Silicon Valley. And they think that the location of the university where we are right now, this is the hardware side of the Silicon Valley. It's very easy to have access to some very top companies here and work with them. And so many of that crowd also comes here. So it's a mix of international students, mostly international at the moment, but the number of domestic students is rising every year. I can talk more about that, what kind of support we have for those students.
That's incredible. Thank you for everything that you're sharing. And again, I have so many questions. It's so interesting to hear you kind of list off all of the things that we think we know about higher ed and say we're upsetting all of those. I used to work in K-12 schools, and we had this concept of real school. There's this, I think it's David Labrie, or one of those researchers, who kind of says, like, when we think of school, we expect certain things. And as a result, it's very hard to make change because people expect children in desks in rows, a teacher at the front of the classroom, those kinds of things. I would assume higher ed is even worse in this situation, that we expect it to look like, I mean, there are movies about what it looks like to go to college and books and things, everything. Tell me, what is the one thing that you are truly transforming at San Francisco Bay University that you're most proud of?
What I'm most proud of?
Yeah.
I think one of the most interesting things that I've been able to do here is to shift our focus from content to experience.
Okay.
And
What does that look like?
is key. Experience is key in everything. That end-to-end experience from when a student enters a course and when a student exits a course, and that experience is beyond the text.
Yeah.
It has to be there's a whole I've created a framework of teaching and learning here that everyone tries to now follow. It says that a student-centered education, it's a buzzword everyone uses. Let's be student-centered. But what we say is that the student-centered education is only possible if it's personal, if it's experiential, and if it's relational. If those three are missing, you're not giving a student-centered experience. And this is something that we're really trying to unpack from the abstract terms to real action points. What does it look like to have personalized experiences? What does relationships and meaningful relationships and multiple meaningful relationships look like in the context of higher ed?
So tell me, what does it look like to have a personal experiential? I'm not going to go with the relationship, but that part where it's like true experiences and not what I think of as higher ed, which is sitting in a classroom with large groups of students and a professor at the front and a TA who does office hours. What does experiential education look like?
Yeah, so let me back up. The way most educators, especially in STEM or maybe in other disciplines too, the way we design experiences is mostly we're inspired by a book that we read. Is like, what an amazing book. This should be a course. And over time, many of these have been designed as textbooks. They would have 16 chapters or 15 chapters in sync with the 15-week semester model, and the faculty would cover a chapter a week. These books would come with problem statements at the back that students will test out. And this has been leading everything. The professor says, this book has everything I ever wanted to teach. So you teach to the book, you teach the content. You're never trying to set a baseline of who my students are, what are their lived experiences, what kind of interactions they want to have with the content that we are bringing in the classroom. How can this content look different when seen from different perspectives? And also, what could assessments look like? And how can they be personalized? And all of this is something that we are thinking that content, of course, is a very important part, but this cannot be the whole thing that drives the experience, because in an effort to deliver the content, you completely discount the learner. So when you shift the lens to who my students are, and then you go backward and then think about what kind of content now comes in, it's very different. One example. I'm trained as a physicist, but I'm also a designer, and I've also worked in higher ed for a very long time. I'm teaching a course in design, and when it comes for students to develop an understanding of a certain part of the content, we do not give them a chapter of a book. What we give them is a playlist of resources that are coming from multiple mediums. There are podcasts, there are TED Talks, there are written articles, research articles, and we say that pick any 5 that you like, and they're curated in such a way that it doesn't matter if 2 students have chosen completely 2 different resources. What they come back with is an understanding of the same content, but they have gone through a different route in coming to that understanding. Some may prefer the video format. Some may prefer the audiobook format. Maybe they're traveling and commuting in a bus, and that's when they want to listen to the content instead of, and the same is true when they're submitting their responses. And then really personalizing, having a relationship with everything that's been given to you, and then converting that into some sort of a small experiment in your life, mini experiment, prototype. And then thinking beyond what quizzes, homeworks, mids, and finals are. We don't use them. We don't go that standard route. What we say is that the ability to demonstrate your understanding of a content can be done in multiple mediums and in multiple ways. And these time-constrained methods that we use are not really representative of what you actually end up doing in life.
Okay, so isn't that a challenge, though, for a professor who's trying to ensure everyone has the same skills or the same understanding, and then everyone's coming in at different places, different times, and different outcomes?
It's not a challenge, actually. It actually supports, because then students are able to identify the learning mediums that support them best, and then they also explore other mediums. And the courses are also designed that they would have individual parts, but at multiple points, they would have a lot of efforts that you do as groups and teams. But those groups and teamwork are not your standard go make a team and then just do it and who knows who does what work. They are again designed to be very meaningful. So define your role, understand the process. And there is a lot of not just tolerance, but intentional design to fail. So try many things and continue to fail. What you're rewarded is for the process through which you went, and not that I arrived at X outcome or Y outcome. In terms of learning outcomes, we in what I'm giving an example is from our revised general education curriculum. Now, students, because they're working on the projects with a certain fidelity, and when you design smart rubrics and you design smart lots of feedback to students throughout the semester, you're able to nudge them constantly. Some require a larger nudge, some require a smaller nudge, but by the time that they're ending the semester, you see that there is if it's not 100% uniform distribution, it is still a distribution where most students are concentrated in an area where their understanding of where they were at the beginning of the semester is dramatically different from where they are at the end of the semester.
Okay, at the very beginning, you listed off all of the things that you're kind of disrupting, right? Disrupting, and one of them was the idea of degrees and 4 years and the amount of time you have to spend. Most universities, I would assume, measure their success, one, by like publications, research, and then also student degrees, right? And students getting through. What are you measuring your success at San Francisco Bay University by?
So universities also measure their success by the graduation rates. How many students are graduating over 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? We think that it's not fair to measure someone's success. I think it's a cop-out when you say a 6-year graduation rate or 8-year. Many of these are in situations where they can't afford to stay in higher ed for a very, very long period of time. And in some cases, people say that these longer periods are to support their journeys. But a traditional higher ed experience also comes with many challenges, with no guarantees that you are going to get through the experience that you wanted because of the limitation of resources, courses, lots of students coming for that. So our success is measured by many things. One of them, of course, is providing a very well-rounded student support system. SFBU is unique in that sense. For example, we have unlimited mental health support. There's no limit to how much mental health support you can get, which is one of the most important things this generation is going through. I'll talk more about that later, that we do work on trauma-informed teaching to neurodivergent students. But this is the central point, that we are looking at ensuring that every student who becomes a part of our institution, what support frameworks were provided for them to ensure that they are timely graduating with very important and critical skills. And those skills are not generic skills. Like a university will have 5, 6 learning outcomes. The process through which SFBU came about, the skills that students have, is very interesting. And the way they're measured is also very different and interesting. And because we're just 2 years old, the first batch that's going through this experience is going to come out in 2028.
Oh, wow.
Because this is, as I mentioned, very new project, fresh project. The first batch that I started engaging with came last year. And so just to back up a bit on when you say what do we measure success as, or how do we know that we're successful in doing what we're doing? In the area where we are based, we started talking to a lot of industries that surround us. And these are the big companies that are available in Silicon Valley, all the big names you can think of. And we went there, and there was an interesting question that the team was asking at the time when they met them, that say someone has already entered your industry and you have these two individuals, which one of this is more likely to rise up the ranks as opposed to the other one? And why? What are you thinking? What happens to them beyond the skills that they bring in terms of their disciplinary skills? What happens when they grow? And we got lots of interesting answers. So it was a backward design exercise that went on to helped us understand a list of what we call traits or competencies, that if you have these, then you would be able to really grow in whichever industry you become a part of. So there are 5 things that came out. That if you are a tenacious leader, and term tenacious was very, very important. How do you show tenacity? If you are interpersonally gifted, given the work that's happening here, you must be a global navigator. You must not be a tech follower. You have to be a tech trend setter. And if you are an enlightened thinker. And then these 5 terms, again, very broad. were then converted into specific competencies. For example, a tenacious leader is measured by having a growth mindset, a creative problem-solving approach, and productive optimism. And then those are further measured as behaviors, individual behaviors that you will be able to indicate. For example, are you seeking constructive feedback? What's your reaction when you get any kind of feedback? What happens when you face any form of adversity? And so these were designed before anything was launched. And now what happens is that the baseline was set when the students came in by asking a series of questions. How do you rate yourselves in these? And then every semester as they're growing, there is a measurement that's happening in terms of their two things are happening. The students are self-scoring themselves on these 5 areas, saying that, for example, I was really bad at leadership. Now I think I've moved an inch forward. Or I thought I was a great leader. I came here and I realized I'm not. So I've moved an inch backward. And then the faculty are also providing a perspective from their lens. So say if I was teaching a course that was measuring interpersonally gifted and a global navigator, I can come back and say that this student is, to my understanding, at this particular level at the moment. And then there's support designed around that.
Wow. That's incredible. So in your dream scenario, there will be a point at which employers, things like Y Combinator, will say SFBU is the place that you go for the people who have these skills. It's not really about do they have a degree in English literature or Russian history. It's about the fact that they have built these things and they're tech. Everybody who comes out of there, they're enlightened thinkers, they're tech trend centers, their interpersonal skills are really strong. And that's how you're going to lead the change, is that it's not really about what the piece of paper says you know, but instead what the piece of paper says who you are.
That's absolutely correct. That's a beautiful way to put it, Laura. Yes.
Is there anyone else trying to do this? Are you the first? I don't know of a university that has this kind of perspective. I know K-12 concepts with IB and stuff like that, but even that has a diploma program with tests and assessments associated that are about what skills, what knowledge you have. What's another example of this? Could I find another one?
I haven't come across an experience like this. I'm sure people are trying, but I think the problem with the size of higher ed is such that maybe some people are trying it within their programs or departments or in pockets. Doing it at the size of an institution is very tough. For that, you need to have a very different approach to who you are. SFBU really exists as a startup. You can say that there's we don't follow dramatic hierarchies to make decision making. It's a very, very flat hierarchy. Ranks and authorities. Ranks are mostly to describe the kind of work you would be doing, but it's not layers and layers of administration and red tape that doesn't let work happen at the base, which is usually a hallmark of higher ed, which I've been a part of all my life.
Yeah. Well, so I think in some ways, though, the way we've kind of created this signal in other places is the tier of university you were going to, right? So you have a Harvard degree in whatever. Then someone else who has gone to Harvard would say, I went to Harvard. It's all full of small people who are tech trendsetters and enlightened thinkers and all of those things. So you have those things because you got into that school. Is kind of would you agree that that's how we've given the signal in the past, is by brand name? And now you're saying it's the way we're going to build the whole thing. So our brand name will come because this is how we're built.
That is correct. In fact, it's automatically assumed that if you become a part of that top R1, tier 1 institutions, that you're going to come out with XYZ experiences, which, by the way, is not true. We know of some very big names. They went to very big universities and do not display the traits that we're talking about. I think institutionally trying to do this is important, because then we are committing to the success of every single individual that becomes a part of our journey. And the kind of students that we are trying to support really require that kind of attention and that kind of support in order to grow from where they are to a point where they can be. And they are very, very extremely talented people, individuals. Discounting them or discounting their abilities to have meaningful big change at the very beginning of their life, I think it's a horrible thing that has been happening for a very long period of time.
And then your graduates, these 2028 graduates, they'll come out with, a piece of paper or something that says, one, they have these skills, but they also have a focus, a knowledge focus base of the Russian literature, whatever. They'll have that as well.
Yeah, so we're still in many ways, the degrees are very practical in a sense. It's not a liberal arts college. The gen ed program sounds very different, very, very liberal artsy, but we still have the current degree programs are pretty standard. There is a computer science degree. There is a business program. Undergrad is actually two programs at the moment, computer science and business. We have an upcoming psychology program. And at the master's level, we have a bit more. We have different variations of MBA. There is one that is very focused on AI. I think we'll talk about that later. And then there is a master's in electrical engineering, and there's a master's in computer science. And once the psychology program is up and running, there would be an MS in that as well. It's very focused. It's very small. That again came with a lot of research of what is it that we want to equip these students with, both in terms of depth and in terms of breadth. So yeah, they walk away with some very specific skills, but the idea is to top off those skills with these very important traits that don't just let you land a job, but really allow you to put yourself on a rocket and then really grow to your potential within those spaces.
It's so interesting because I think 20 years if you had taken this to like a technical, like a lot of the degrees you're talking about are technical and heavy STEM, I think they would have laughed at you. I think they would have said like, they don't need that. They just need to be able to code. They need to be able to engineer, all of those things. But I feel like the world has changed, right? Like we're seeing this need. I think you're maybe the place calling it out. And I think it's kind of interesting that what you've married here are, technical degrees with the social emotional, let's call it that, human-centered skills that make it so you can really succeed in life, not just at the job and not what you do every day, but as a person.
That is correct. That is absolutely correct. With these skills, there was always a missing link. And some people arrive at that link themselves and then they do phenomenal work. And we've seen those people. But instead of leaving it abstract as a part of your learning experience, we're making it explicit. How do you make those connections with these skills? What else do you need to have in order to really make meaningful impact?
And wouldn't it be a lot easier just to focus on the knowledge? Like, isn't that like with higher ed, some of the mentality is like, here's what you need to learn, either learn it or don't.
Yeah, I have something to say about this. I think in higher ed, we get very easily satisfied by claiming that we have made our students think critically. A critical thought is not as any good if it does not translate into any action. And to translate a thought into action requires a lot of skills because you're thinking critically. And this is also reflected in the teaching philosophy we had. What we call it is a think, do, and create model. If a professor comes and says, in my course, students were thinking beautifully, what extraordinary thoughts came out, what an enlightening conversation, then we're happy. Like, yeah, that's one part. But what after is more important. What were they doing with that thought? What happened? Were they satisfied that, oh, I feel so amazing, I said some cool things in the class today? Are you able to do anything with those things? Were they able to identify that in order to convert those thoughts or whatever those thoughts are you able to describe them as actions and what's needed? And maybe you don't have the resources today to conduct those actions, but were you able to identify? I think in higher ed, we pause a lot at the thought. We feel smart. We say smart things. We use big words, lots of jargon. And then we walk out feeling accomplished that we won that meeting today by saying lots of cool words. But the action part, I think, continues to be. So knowledge absolutely is important, but it's not useful if you're unable to do anything with it.
I really love that statement. I just wrote it down. To translate a thought into action takes a lot of skills. I think that is really a beautiful thing to say. And I think it's really important because I think there are a lot of, talking heads, people who have lots of ideas, but taking that movement, that's really special to me. Thank you for that. But I have to tell you, there are lots of ways to take thoughts into action. Higher ed, especially in this moment, maybe one of the hardest. Why disrupt the higher ed? Why not just kind of do more boot camps or skills-based things? Tell me a little bit about that decision.
I think the team that's involved in creating this process, many of them also come from first-generation students in higher ed. I think to them, it all felt like a very close connection with all of these experiences was what was moving it, that higher ed continues to be that window towards entry into a world that promises a very interesting understanding of who we are, where we are, and why we are. And then at the same time, during the same process, developing the social skills, the intellectual skills, in fact, not just skills, the capital as well, the emotional capital, the social capital, the financial capital, to really arrive at a launch pad. What you're saying is the boot camps and other experiences, I think that the world of higher ed is truly coming to an end the way it exists. And we might continue the way we are for a few years, maybe a few decades. But personalized learning and overall experiences are changing big time in terms of what's expected of us is changing big time. And given how slow higher ed moves, it will be very difficult for this industry to stay the way it is. But at the moment, this still seems like the right entry point that would inspire the communities that we are inviting as. The challenge with the boot camps and smaller things is that they prepare you for what is now and not what is after. And that's a huge problem. I can teach you Java skills today, HTML, CSS, and say, go find a job. And then you come and realize that a beautiful AI code is able to do that faster than you, and you're back to square one. Which boot camp do I go to now? Now, learning should be a continuous process. We should continue to expand our ability to do things, which happens in life. And so that's why this framework that really prepares you to give a very broad launching pad, that if X disappears, you have Y in your hand. If Y disappears, then this is, or in many ways, if I have to use a metaphor, we give you tons and tons of tools that if half of them even disappear, you have another set of half of another boxes that you can create new tools with. And that's why sticking to quicker, shorter journeys to success do sound like quicker paths to success, but I don't think that they have a lasting impact on the communities we're trying to serve.
Wow, that's incredible. You said that, you think that we're at this moment in higher ed, it's really going to change. Like it's not going to exist as it did before. I have two questions on that. One, I know that you spent a lot of your career in Pakistan, not in the US. Do you think that's a worldwide change that we're about to have? And then two, what is going to be there when this is gone?
It has. So I initially studied in Europe, so I got.
Oh, it's even everywhere.
I have. So I also tried to be at the big names. That was my goal as well in life, and I experienced Europe. Then I started. I just didn't work in Pakistan. I was part of the team that created the first liberal arts college in the country. So it was a very transformative experience. And then here, when I was, of course, in the early part of my career, I was very happy and satisfied the way we were building new things. I've always been involved in building new things. But I think during the COVID-19 experiences, a lot was exposed in terms of what happens in higher ed. Everyone was shocked when this our professor at Zoom giving experiences that parents were like, I don't want to pay for this. What is this? What's happening? And so the way no one is questioning the foundations on which the whole higher ed industry is built. As I mentioned, the number of years, the disciplinary approach, the real world, as the so-called real world, has disconnected from it. They're doing different things. They're doing things at a different speed. They're doing things with a different goal and output in mind. Success is not measured the way it's measured, the way we are trained in higher ed. And even success within higher ed is very disconnected with what success looks like in the real world. If I am supposed to be a vice president or a president, I must look a certain way. I must have a certain age. But if you look at the tech industry, you will have a 21-year-old CEO.
Right.
And so the path to success is very different in both industries. Higher ed has over time, lots of functions of higher ed are taken away from it. When I was starting my research career, I realized, which was in nanophysics, I had the ability to do that in the tech industry as well, that were offering tech-based PhDs with better instruments that my university could offer. And over time, a lot of that tech has exited the research world. That's a problem because tech works at a different pace. You need a new phone every year. If I was doing a PhD on a processor, I will put out a new processor in 3 years or 4 years. Industry doesn't wait. So higher ed, that's why the research direction of higher ed has changed as well. Companies are doing research at their own end. Some research is passed to the universities, but if it's time sensitive and it's fast, universities aren't doing it. So if you take away the kind of research, and then if you take away the way we are still stuck in the disciplinary world. And when that discipline becomes irrelevant, people become irrelevant. That's happening so fast. If I'm trained as an electrical engineer or a civil engineer or an agricultural engineer, and I realize 80% of the work I do can be done without human intervention, then all of a sudden I start thinking about what else do I have? Where else do I go? So higher ed is disconnected from that pace, that speed. The learning experiences that we have, or the way we learn today, even you and I, the way we learn now is very different from how people learned 2 decades ago. Access to resources has changed. Higher ed still hasn't changed. We still have those large classrooms with 300 people, a sage on the stage. The only thing that has changed is an interactive projector has come in, and maybe professors do a couple of games. But I mean, I imagine what we're competing against. If I'm in a classroom in a 2-hour or 1-hour long class, this student is also used to watching 1 hour of highly amazing entertainment produced on their TV. And so that's how they're used to seeing 1 hour. And I'm giving them that 1 hour of an extremely boring monologue that they know, by the way, also exists outside of the class, and they can find some very interesting ways to do it. So the way we're serving the people is wrong. It can't continue the way it is. And so that's why I think that the future, the current shape of the university is constantly becoming incompatible with the future. We don't see it the way we do it because we're in the middle of a paradigm change. And in the middle of a change, you don't see it. It's only at the outside you see, oh, the paradigm just shifted and we moved from stage 1 to stage 2.
Wow, it's super interesting. There's a company I know that's, again, I have come from K-12 originally. Their kind of tagline is like the Netflix of AP courses, that if you're a student trying to get your AP credits, that it's going to be engaging and interesting. To your point, this idea of what we're competing against is so intense. And especially when it comes to online learning. I recently read, I think it was WGU's president said something like, with online learning, you're not just competing with Netflix, you're also, or their phone, you're also competing with their laundry and their kids and their work expectations, right? If you're offering something to an adult learner, for example, what life is asking of them while they try to get this degree, certification, or whatever, is hard. And so I think that really makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Do you think that, I feel like we've said the word personalized a lot. We've talked about engaging a lot. Do you think AI is also playing a role in this ability to make classes and higher ed just totally different?
100%. Absolutely. It's not just playing a role, it's dramatically changing it. And again, and this is something we did a lot at SFBU. We have worked, I think, more than any institution would do collectively in using AI to serve the purpose and role we have. In all the courses we're teaching in our Gen Ed, there is a personalized teaching assistant that's available to them, which is not a generic TA that has read a book. It is designed for each session. So if you are in week 2 of the class, the teaching assistant knows that the professor has covered this in week 1. This is what they plan to cover today. And this is the experience they have in mind from point 1 to point X of the class. As a student, you can stop it and ask. It's open in front of you. It's possible that you come from a country where English is not your first language and you're struggling in understanding what the professor has said. So you catch a term and you say, professor just said that, I don't know what that means, or it sounded like this. Or just ask, what's the course plan for today? What's the class plan for today? The TA would say the professor will walk you through this, leading you through this, and that. And at any given moment, student can ask that I see this image or this visual, and I don't know what that relates to. And that AI is real time talking to them and telling them what's happening. They can also speak to that teaching assistant in their original language of wherever they come from. Because one of the most important things that we need to first focus on is the training of thought, not the language in which it is trained, but the thought itself. Expression comes later. You and I say what we say after we've thought about it. If the thought is poor, we're not going to say anything amazing, irrespective of language, accent, vocabulary. And so those personalized teaching assistants are there in their class, and they are available pre-class, they're available during class, they're available post-class. And those teaching assistants are also evolved now in giving you feedback on, so let's say you're submitting an assignment to me and not really sure if it matches the things that I've said in the rubric. So you can upload and you can say that, looking at the rubric and looking at your work and looking at the past feedback the professor gives, you're very likely to get this grade because you're saying this consistently, and the professor has previously highlighted that this is not the approach to do this. So students are getting a lot of feedback at the spot. And then this is faster than they would get from anyone else.
Wow. And so you're doing this all with an AI. The AI, when you keep saying it's a teacher or tutor who's with them, it's an AI tutor that's with them.
An AI tutor that I train, every instructor trains the AI tutor in every class. If I was to give a human example, imagine you are a teaching assistant in a course and the professor calls you every week and trains you in the material of the coming week in every single experience. Say that you and 20 other students, 20 other TAs are going to be attached to one student each. And every time they're doing this, you help them with that. But you're trained every week. And so this is what we do. We train this AI in all the content I will use, all the TED Talks, all the YouTube Talks, all the podcasts, all the design boards I've created.
Right.
And then I tell it the experience that this is how I want to start the class. And this is by the time when I end the class, I want the students to know.
Right. That's, first of all, that's incredible. Especially, I'm curious how your professors are taking the time to train it and how much they enjoy that. At Chiron, we have something somewhat similar. It's not like every class and every week. It's when you put it in, the same idea that an AI instructor is kind of interacting with students and talking them through and making sure that they understand. And to your point, what we have seen, again, we talked about those adult learners competing with the laundry, that especially because so many of these learners are working at night, after work, and after the kids have gone to bed, there are no TAs at that point. There's nobody there to help them to understand the material. So even if they're doing the work, even if they're logging in and trying to do the homework, there's no support. And that's a huge leap for anyone. Anyone who's tried to learn something new understands how hard that is.
That is also correct. And also, when you don't have the supporting skills, you usually, if you look on internet, it takes you down to a rabbit hole. That you're like, what's a logarithm? And you're like, oh, you need to know this. And then it takes you another link and then another link and another link. And 5 tabs later, you're very far away to what logarithms are. In this particular case, when you say that the professor asked me to solve a second order differential equation, but I don't even understand what that means, it takes you backward a few steps and it keeps going backward until it meets the point where you should be starting. It says, all right, you understand that, let's rebuild again. And I think that this is a very good example of personalized learning and experience because also in many subjects, we use symbolic language and those symbols can look very different in different cultures. I might use a certain symbol to teach mathematics that a Russian professor used a different symbol and a French professor used a different symbol and an American used different. So this is also very challenging for students who start education in higher ed, especially coming from international backgrounds, because a lot of terms are new to them. They learn them differently. And again, these AI tools are able to bring them up to speed on that. Yeah, the one card I should mention, you asked how I'm also using the same tools to train faculty how to teach.
Interesting.
Because what we figured out that if a teaching assistant can be given a set of learning outcomes and you backward design the whole experience, why can't faculty be considered students in an experience where they're trying to check what they're producing against the best practices that we're producing, and then in the process learn without being judged what I know and what I don't know? And that's a problem in higher ed. We have to really fake a lot because people expect us to know, but we're not trained as teachers. No one in higher ed is given teacher training. K through 12 you are. In higher ed, we're not. So if someone says backward design, that may mean nothing to faculty. When we say universal design for learning, that may mean nothing to people. But when you ask them, say, of course I know it. Of course I do it. With AI tools, you can do it by taking away that judgment factor.
We hear that a ton from people who use Chiron. It's the same thing as like it's a safe place to like answer questions and not feel like they're going to remember it forever, this dumb thing you said, or judge you and to give you feedback right away so you can get better. I think that safe space to try something new is something that anyone can understand. I think that's really great. The one thing that keeps coming back to me, and this is, we're getting close to the end of our time, but I feel like Brene Brown, I don't know if you're a Brene Brown fan, I am, or Mel Robbins, one of those people would be like obsessed with this concept, right? They would hear what you're doing and think this is just the most amazing thing and that you totally understand like what we need in this world. But I can't imagine this has been easy, right? To build a university a few years ago on a totally different concept. You have 2,000 students. What are the biggest barriers right now to you scaling? But I'm sure people who I really admire would say is incredible.
Yeah. We don't have 2,000 students yet. We're building, we're starting. We have, I think the current number is around 500, but that's the peak capacity. I think one of the biggest challenges in higher ed continues to be the preparation of the professors to give meaningful learning experiences, because we are trained in very, very different ways, archaic ways actually now. And when we go into the classroom, the idea that teaching is very personal. I will do whatever I want because I'm the subject matter expert and I would be able to translate my learning into the best experience, is it's not true. And that's the biggest challenge, that how do we help faculty members or professors or academics understand that learning needs to go beyond just putting check marks on the content that you have delivered, that success looks very, very different. And I think a really big challenge in this domain is that the number of students that are neurotypical in a classroom is less than 25% now, because trauma and depression and anxiety, if you bring them within the realm of neurodivergence, all of a sudden that's 3 out of 4 students in a class are like that. But the professors are constantly teaching to that mythical average student, and that mythical average student does not exist. And so this has been a constant challenge, that how do we understand that the learner that's coming into our classrooms is dramatically different to when we were acting as learners. Everything else, I think, can be figured out. You can make structural changes to higher ed, make it quick, make it fast. But what needs the most amount of attention is, how do you curate meaningful experiences? How do you convince the faculty that your role is no longer that glass of water that everyone's going to come and drink from? There are many more resources out there that they will use. So you are a guide on the side. You might be the best guide that's available to them right now to navigate through what resources are needed. And also at times for these young individuals making connections, I see learning education as putting different dots on a canvas. The more dots you have, the more shapes you can draw, because you can sketch through them. Imagine you just 4 dots, you can't make much with them. You make a square, maybe a few different shapes. But if you have 1,000,000 dots, then you're able to see different shapes coming up. That's what life does to you. That's why we're able to make different meanings out of our same experiences at different age. This is what the faculty member is doing, putting more dots, showing them more connections. Say, hey, you're looking at linear algebra in just numbers, but this is essential for machine learning. And forget that. Imagine you are a farmer who's blind, and this could be very helpful in helping you get a great crop. And you're like, wow, from linear algebra equations to helping blind farmers, I would not have been able to Google any of that. And so this is the largest challenge, that how do we help faculty members become empathetic, imaginative, creative, and willing to let go of the stature that they've held for such a long time, that my job is no longer to get the spotlight. I should be known because of my students and not because of my own work and my degrees.
Yeah, I feel like you've come full circle of like, now the faculty also have to buy into those 5 things that you talked about with being tenacious and enlightened and all of those things in order to give it to the students. And I think that's really powerful. And I don't think it's even just the faculty or the students. I think it's all of us, right? How do we all get to a place where it's about the work and not about the spotlight or what, LinkedIn says or any of those other things, so that we're prepared with these skills. I think it's really lovely. All right, we're running out on time, so I have 5 questions I ask every guest. This has been really fun. I feel super inspired. I'm like, maybe I want to go to SFBU, for the 5th or 5th degree, because I've been buying into this idea of it's got to be the paper, it's got to say these things. So this has been really fun. But if you were going to go get a new degree or certification today, what would it be in, Anzar?
It would be in history, and mostly in history and philosophy of science.
Nice. What's a lesson you have learned in life that only came through experience, not through schooling?
That only came through experience. I developed empathy, and I learned the concept and practice of empathy mostly through experience and not because anyone taught me that. And engaging with students was a very, very important part of that.
Wow, that's really beautiful. What's a signal that currently we don't put on resumes, but you think we should?
I think our resumes do not speak to the human side of who we are. And I think that is something that should be there. Who are you as an individual? How do you, I mean, if you are a part of my team, how do I feel with you having in my team? And how do others feel when you're a part of that? That signal is not visible. There's some buzzwords, team player, this, that. But I think if anyone is able to indicate what would happen to the team if you're a part of that early on in your resume, I think that would be very powerful.
Yeah, that's really great. What's your personal mantra?
Uh,
Or one of them? I have a feeling you have many.
I think we live in a world of probabilities. Being overly deterministic about anything and then going all in is not helpful in growing. And so I know that whatever we're trying to do in personal life and professional life, there's a probability that this is the best thing, or perhaps this is close to the best thing, or maybe that's the worst thing. And being constantly open to looking not for evidence or signals of success, but signals that this is failing is very critical. And that's what my personal mantra is, to see where am I failing, not where am I succeeding.
I love that. I really do. And your go-to karaoke song?
My go-to karaoke. I'm a horrible singer. There are no karaoke songs that I go to. None. I've been told not to sing ever in my life, and every time I do, even the most loved ones leave the room.
Come on, you don't have like a rap song or like a song that you will dance to at least? Something.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I listen to a lot of orchestral metal music.
Okay.
And I'm thinking about one cover of "Nothing Else Matters" by Metallica by Apocalyptica. Anyhow, that is something when I'm feeling it is like, let's listen to that. I didn't tell you I was a radio jockey for 10 years.
I did read it about you though, so you've got to have a song, right?
And then I was an improv. I learned improv theater for a while, and so I was a part of improv troops as well.
Gosh, I was just listening to a podcast about leadership, and that like when teams are like disjointed and not working well together, this leadership expert, the first thing she does is like make them go through improv exercises. That the first thing they need is for the walls to come down to be able to connect together.
Everyone in higher ed should be trained in improv. Everyone, no exception. Administrators and faculty, everyone should be trained in improv.
Just one more way that you're upsetting higher ed, Anzar. I really appreciate it. This has been a really fun conversation. Thank you so much for your time today. And thanks for sharing everything about what you're doing at San Francisco Bay University.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Laura. Thank you for everything you're doing to share these stories with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Awesome.